So, good evening, or maybe good morning. So, Ajahn Karuniko has gone to England to support his father, who seems to be just have not so long to live. So he's asked me to say a few words this evening. It's the first time I've given a talk to a virtual audience and live over. And I wasn't really supposed to be here at this time, but like many people, I had to change my plans and ended up locked down here at Buddha Bodhivana. And actually a very nice place to get locked down. In terms of a beautiful monastery, very nice sangha, very kind support, beautiful environment. So it's been quite easy to adjust to the changing conditions. But I think for many people it's not been so easy and smooth, and many challenges. And like this month also we've been, it's been Wesak, and a time to contemplate the life of the Buddha. And when we look at the life of the Buddha, he was, brought up in a palace, a lot of comforts, all the best of what the world could offer at the time. And it was quite, comfortable and happy. But then something shook his world. He went out the palace without announcing it, and as the story goes, for the first time saw old age, sickness and death. And of course that, just shook his world and motivated him to go and seek that which was beyond old age, sickness and death, so that when the time came, he could be at peace with it, not suffer from it. Maybe we can relate more to that story now, because for many of us our world has been shaken from the sort of routines and normal life. What we thought was normal has had to go through some changes due to this the situation. But maybe for us it's motivated us to seek a high refuge, really look to the teachings of the Buddha, and and contemplate life in a more wise way. And of course, also being locked down, it's given us opportunity to be more still and contemplate. Like I wonder how many people would be joining us this evening on this live streaming if there wasn't lockdown. And there was opportunities to go here and there and do this and do that. When you read about the Buddha's life, there's many things that maybe for the more rational mind seem a bit like fantasy. For instance, like the Buddha's birth, and as it's reported in the suttas, about the miraculous things that happen around the Buddha's birth. And it sort of defies modern science, and it can seem like just something somebody concocted. But the Buddha did not teach a belief system. He didn't ask us to believe what we read, but just something that we can contemplate. So we don't have to believe in the story of the Buddha's birth, all the fantastic, miraculous things that happened. But again, do we have to disbelieve? Can we just keep an open mind? We don't know. And, part of our practice of the Buddha's teaching is the willingness to be with the not knowing. We can't know everything straight away. But maybe what we need to know now, we can use what we have now and allow other things to unfold as we develop the practice. On one occasion, Ananda was relating what the Buddha had related to him about these miraculous things that happened around the birth of the Buddha. And while the Venerable Ananda was informing the bhikkhus about this, the Buddha himself turned up and said, what were you talking about? And Ananda was saying, reciting about all the miraculous things that happened around the Buddha's birth. And he described them as the wonderful and marvelous qualities of a Buddha. But then the Buddha's response I found very interesting. The Buddha said, but also remember this as a wonderful and marvelous quality of a Buddha. A Buddha knows feelings, pleasant, unpleasant and neutral, as they arise, as they persist, as they cease. A Buddha knows perceptions, as they arise, as they persist, as they cease. A Buddha knows thoughts, mental formations, as they arise, as they persist, as they cease. And the Buddha said, remember this, Ananda, as also a wonderful and marvelous quality of a Buddha. So this is, where we can be like Buddha. Can we observe feelings as they arise, as they persist, as they cease? Perceptions, memories, mental formations. And this is what we can know, isn't it? From direct experience. And this is, the Buddha is pointing at what we can actually know from direct experience. We don't have to believe. We can observe. And this is, being Buddha ourselves. Taking refuge in that Buddha, that ability to be mindfully aware. So the situation at the moment has brought up many feelings, perceptions, thoughts, worries, anxieties, fear. But what the Buddha's point out is that we don't have to be overwhelmed by these things. We can cultivate this inner Buddha that can more observe these things without being overwhelmed by them. So it's natural in our life we're going to experience these sort of various mind states: desire, aversion, worries, anxieties, fear. But Buddha experienced these things too. But he through his cultivation, developing mindful awareness, he was able to rise above. Like the lotus rises above the mud in the pond. And this is, something we can do too. And the Buddha said, if you couldn't do it, I wouldn't teach it. But because you can do it, I teach it. When we, consider meditation, I know sometimes I hear people say, I can't meditate, my mind's all over the place. But, can we watch that? Can we be aware of that? Because then it is, isn't it? It's perceptions, thoughts, feeling of the moment. So you can say when we first start to meditate, the ability to be aware is small, and the minds and the experiences seem to be big, overwhelming sometimes. But if we do, and keep effort with the practice, keep practicing, then the Buddha grows. The Buddha in the quality of mindful awareness in the heart grows, it becomes bigger. And then these other things diminish. We can be bigger than the desires, the aversions, the anxieties, to mindful awareness. We can grow this Buddha in the heart if we take time to grow it. Take time to stop, be still, and observe. We learn how we get caught up in these things. How we get carried away with our different moods and things, but through time we learn not to get carried away. On the night of the Buddha's enlightenment, it's often depicted as the Buddha is sat on the Bodhi tree and surrounded by the hosts of Mara, all these images, sensual images, fearful images, threatening images, all sorts of, we said, the hosts of Mara. And the Buddha touches the earth to bear witness. Now, I don't know if this is what is meant by this gesture, but the Buddha gave the analogy later in the teachings about making the mind like the great earth. Because, whatever is thrown onto the earth, be it clean or dirty, beautiful, ugly, the earth doesn't react to that. And, touching the earth can be like, the mind is to the point where now it's not getting caught up in these things. It sees them for what they are. And then those things lose their power and disappear. Because one isn't going out to get caught up in them. This refuge in Buddha, the ability to be mindfully aware, is so well developed that these things don't take hold anymore. The mind has become like the great earth. Even after the Buddha's enlightenment, there's instances where, say, Mara comes and tries to tempt the Buddha, but the Buddha just says, "I know you, Mara." And then Mara says, "Oh, the Buddha knows me," and then disappears. So even if we're sat there and experiencing lots of thoughts and unpleasant feelings and memories, we can still practice this, being with the Buddha, being with that quality, just to be aware and to observe these things, to know these things. And that ability to observe and know becomes bigger and better, than the conditions. So this is, important in this time. Not if we, we do get affected by the things around us, but if we can keep our own mind in a steady way, that will really support the situation around us and our family and our friends. Like we had this saying in England, keep calm and carry on. Keeping the mind steady. So, we experience, these, worries and anxieties, but they don't take us over. We can still function and think clearly. But, out of all these unfortunate circumstances, actually, good things manifest too. I've, since this thing with the coronavirus, I've been, looking at the news a bit more, especially, English news, because just wondering how things are back in the home country. Which, normally I wouldn't be looking at every day. When my father was alive, I'd go and visit him every few months just to see if he was okay in his old age, and he lived in this very small house and a block of houses with just 2 rooms downstairs and 2 rooms upstairs, and there's only 1 room with a heater in, which was the room downstairs. Didn't have central heating. So when I go and stay with him, I'd be up before him, and I'd go downstairs and put the fire on downstairs and begin there with some meditation. And then my father would come down about 7 o'clock. And the first thing he'd do would put the news on. And, what a way to start the day. And generally it was about all the unskillful things people were doing, and, So when people, like when I've been teaching retreats, how to keep the practice going in our daily life, I recommend don't put the news on first thing. Maybe do some meditation, bring up some skillful aspirations for the day, bring the precepts to mind, but just something to, set up something skillful in the mind. But now look at the news, it's quite different. Many very inspiring things, and acts of compassion and kindness, and people looking out for others. So there's some, see that one would hope that, through this, even though maybe, materially people might be at a loss, but actually on the level of humanness, of these qualities of, looking out for others, helping others, generosity and appreciation too. Like the NHS, every day there's people putting up things expressing appreciation for the NHS. Before this thing, I tended to hear more complaints about the NHS in the media. What was wrong? Because sometimes, the media does tend to dwell on what's wrong with things. So one hopes that, these good things that, people are doing will continue. And people continue to upgrade their heart and mind, even if they've been downgraded materially. And, like the Buddha would say that these, to cultivate the goodness of the heart is a more valuable thing than cultivating material wealth. And the goodness of the heart and mind is what really supports us, in our time of old age and sickness, and when we have to pass away from this world. One of the descriptions of the Buddha is the Maha Karuniko. I'm just the ordinary Karuniko, but the Buddha was the Maha Karuniko, the great compassionate one. And one of the examples of the Buddha's compassion I like to bring to mind was around his passing away. And as the story of the Buddha's life goes, a man called Chunda the goldsmith gave the Buddha his last meal. Now apparently one of the dishes in that meal wasn't good. And the Buddha took some from it, but then didn't allow the other monks to take it. And that was the Buddha's last meal. So, as the Buddha was, lying between the sala trees, ready to pass away, he said to Ananda, he said, there might be people who try to provoke remorse in Chunda the goldsmith because he gave the last meal. But so go to the Chunder Goldsmith and say the two most auspicious meal offerings for the Buddha was the meal offering before his enlightenment and the meal offering before his passing away. And because you gave the last meal to the Buddha, the benefits of that will be a long life, happiness, fame, and a heavenly rebirth. So, to me, this is the very compassionate response to Chunder, who people might have said, "Oh, you killed the Buddha, you gave the last meal. The Buddha died after your meal." I think this is a good story to bring into mind at this time because, there's a lot of blame goes on, isn't there? Who's responsible for the coronavirus? Who's to blame? And then, you hear that the first case of coronavirus in a country, that person got blamed as though they brought it in intentionally. The first person that brought it into the workplace got blamed. Who was the first person who brought it into the care home? So none of these, whoever it wasn't done intentionally, but the tendency to want to, who's to blame? And, we can sometimes waste a lot of energy on finding who to blame rather than using our resources to see how we can put our resources together to solve this problem, to help stop things spreading, to help to allay the illnesses. So, the Buddha's compassion didn't promote blame, he promoted skillful cooperation, helping each other, supporting each other, working together to solve the problems. And then, as the Buddha is about to pass away, somebody comes to see the Buddha. An ascetic by the name of Subhadda came to ask to see the Buddha. And Ananda said, "The Buddha's about to pass away, you can't see him." But then the Buddha heard and said, "Oh, let him come." And allowed Subhadda to come, and he had a question for the Buddha. And his question was, there's all these different teachers around, who's right? And the Buddha's response to that was, don't be concerned in who's right or who's wrong. But if in a teaching there is the factors of the Eightfold Path, then in that teaching you will find enlightened beings. And in this way, the Buddha wasn't elitist. I'm the only one who's got it right. But he was pointing out, any teaching that has the factors of the Eightfold Path, you'll find enlightened beings. And sometimes, the teachings can be clothed in a different language. Doing the same thing, but the language is different. So, in this way, I never found the Buddha like an elitist. And you do find that a lot. People we are right and you're wrong. The elitist mentality. We're the only ones who've got it right. Again, the Buddha's also compassion to see somebody, and the teachings he gave. So there are many, instances from the Buddha's life that I can recollect and remember the Buddha's example. One of the ways of meditating is like Buddha Nusati, to recollect the Buddha's life. And I found many instances from the Buddha's life very inspiring, and done my best, to try and apply similar things to my own life and practice. How the Buddha, was in situations, how he responded to people. Sometimes, it is a hard act to follow, but one does one's best. There's a very nice book about the life of the Buddha, which gives many stories about the Buddha's life. These stories, it's The Life of the Buddha by Bhikkhu Nyanamoli, if you're interested to read about the Buddha's life and his example. So at the time, this time of Wesak, it's a time to bring to mind the Buddha in his life, and to support us in this challenging time, to guide us towards this Buddha refuge, this refuge in mindful awareness, and in skillful ways of contemplating life that leads to the growth of wholesome things and the decline of unwholesome things. So may you all use this challenging time as a way to grow this in a Buddha. Make the Buddha strong and the defilements weak. And realize the end of suffering. So I'd like to offer these reflections for this evening.